So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. Now it's my turn, and as Krijn told you, I'll talk about water policy and not about food policy. 3 remarks with this initial slide. I've got 18 slides. The first one is resilience and water policy, so I'll go again into the concept of resilience, but in a simpler, more explicit way. As a lawyer, I'm not a scientist. I'll try to synthesize what I understood about it and connect it to water policy. It will be each time a scheme and then some examples. Scheme, example, scheme, example. You see my name underneath it. I also should have put the name of Dirk Uytendale on the slide because he has been delivering 25 years water policy draft advices, and he has delivered a lot of material for this talk. And last but not least, I should tell something about the MINARA itself. It's called the MINARA, it's Milieu en Natuur, Environment and Nature Council. It consists of 24 members, which are all of society. So it's all stakeholders. The different colors mean something, and on your, I'm bad into it, on your left side, I'm bad in left and right, that's significant. On your left side, you see, on the upper hand, you see 8 seats for the environmental movement, and down, orange, are 6 seats for social and economic partners, farmers, employers' organizations, trade unions. So we are a rather old-fashioned conflict management council. It sometimes helps, sometimes doesn't help. So it has its advantages and disadvantages. So first plate, second plate. I've been looking to definitions of resilience and adaptation. In fact, I found a Chinese publication, luckily for me in English, which presented 15 definitions of adaptation, the oldest one from 1978, and about 12 definitions of resilience, the oldest one of 2010. Now, I've taken then more official definitions, and the first one is upstairs, is the resilience definition. And that's it's there called the ability of an individual, a household, a community, a country or a region to withstand, to adapt, and to quickly recover from stresses and shocks. It's a definition by the European Commission, but in the context of development policy. So there, it is officially proclaimed, resilience is this: we help other third countries when they have a disaster in such and such way. The other more official definition is of adaptation, and that's of the UNFCCC, CCC. And there, adaptation refers to adjustments in ecological, social, and economic systems in response to actual or expected climatic stimuli, nicely put, and their effects or impacts. It refers to changes in processes and structures to moderate potential damages. So those are 2 official or more or less official definitions. Now, when you look at it schematically, there you see it, a system, and it's impacted by shock, a hammer in this case. And then what can happen? The first thing that can happen is that the system breaks, it collapses. So then it's too fragile for the shock. The other thing that can happen is that it simply resists, it is robust for the shock. And then the 2 other things that can happen are it adjusts, so it remains functioning, it has kind of same output, same structure, but in a slightly modified way. It is adaptive. And then the last thing is it rebuilds itself or reboots itself. It is resilient. It transforms as it has been put this morning. Now, those are different ways of looking at it. And one could say that adaptation policy is not exactly the same as being adaptive. Adaptation policy is the 4 of them. For in adaptation policy, first of all, you tend to look in how far are we fragile. We inventorize our vulnerability. Then we try to get more robust. We try to get stronger. Then the next thing is, of course, then when something happens, we try to adapt to the new situation. And of course, we try to grow and to be better. We try to see the challenge as a chance. Now, another thing that you could say to it is nothing is absolutely fragile, because then it wouldn't exist. Nothing is absolutely robust, because then it would be eternal. Nothing is eternal. And another thing you can say is you can put this thing upon things and upon systems. You can say it about things because a spiral spring, you know, the thing that rebounds, is a thing. It's not a system, it's a thing. And it is flexible and it has tonus. So you flex it and it jumps back. That's a thing. But a system is more complicated, and generally we apply resilience nowadays to systems. Okay, now here some more talk about it. The European Union has published a strategy, the European Commission has published a strategy in 2013 with a lot of elements in it, a lot of interesting elements in it, and some elements, some buzzwords that are in it and that need to be stressed are insurance policy, interesting, relationship with health, relationship with infrastructure, migration is mentioned, very interesting, cohesion policy, rural development policy are mentioned, and guidelines. Now we in the Minaraad, sometimes even we manage to give enlightened advices. And already in 2009, we told the Flemish government that in order to have a good adaptation strategy, it also should be the object of a European strategy. Of course, our influence was far-reaching, and 4 years later, we had a strategy. Now, in 2013, we advised on the Flemish adaptation plan, and there we saw that in that adaptation plan, resilience all of a sudden was there. But it was there in an improvised way. And then we pointed to the fact that it was also in the European adaptation strategy, and so it should be developed in the Flemish strategy. And moreover, in the European public consultation that went along with this strategy, there were a lot of things that were developed, things that were labeled important. And we said that in Flanders, we should implement these two mutatis mutandis. Now, this brings me back to the schemes. And the first question is, of course, a system. What can we consider as a system? It's not so innocent to talk about systems. Yeah, one talks nowadays a lot of systems, but it's not so innocent. First of all, a system consists of elements and relations, of course. The second thing is a system, and certainly hybrid systems like food, energy, and water. Systems are layered. They consist, we can say they consist of humans, they consist of institutions, they consist of communications and actions, they consist of material flows, and they consist of substructures. Generally, when one talks about systems, one talks about one or some of them, not about all of them. The third thing is, the system differentiates into functions. Input and output functions, these are the most obvious. But then you have protective functions and throughput functions. So 3 types of functions. And the fourth thing is that the differentiation within a system is largely in function of its environment than in a systemic theoretical point of view environment. Now this is important, those 4 things, and it's especially important. Now first I'll compare it. So the first, you can compare the elements. You can compare this slide to a house. The elements, that's something like the bricks, the wood, the glass. Those are the elements. The layers, those are the walls, the windows, the way the material is put together. The functions, those are the rooms of the house. And the in and outs, the environment of the house, those are the inhabitants and the life that is in the house. You see, that's the analogy. And so you can explain a system in this way. Now, we go further to examples, and now we come to Flanders. You see here a map of Flanders, water policy in Flanders. By the way, Flanders is an old word, it's a medieval word, it's plural, and it means land that is easily inundated. So by accident, it's the same word as the Netherlands, but it's older, it's medieval. Now, you first see 2 maps left up, and those are 2 maps of the water structure in Flanders. One is the rivers, and the other is the groundwater. Those are 2 layers, and at the same time, they're structured. On the right side, you see 2 maps, and there the layers are divided in basins. according to the framework directive into 13 basins, sub-basins and basins. Then underneath left, you see the boundaries of local authorities. Up and down, you see the waterways that are used for transport. Those are users. This has a function. And then underneath right, you see inhabitants pro basin and industries pro basin. So these are again users. So that's a function. So a difference between functions and layers. You see functions and layers go through one another, but they presuppose one another. Okay, now we come to impact. I told you a system is being impacted, and what does it mean? It can mean three things. One thing is the most obvious, and that's an abrupt impact, a shock. And that's resilience sensu stricto. Boom, and there we are again. But then you have slow impacts, trends, waves. Systems also need to be resilient to what happens in a slow way. And then, last but not least, and often neglected, are internal conflicts. You can have an impact from an internal conflict on a small scale, and for water policy, for example, you have upstream, downstream. There are enough means to handle the inundation, but we don't agree on beforehand. Suddenly, happens something, there's a conflict, and there comes a disaster. So there's an internal strife which causes the impact. And on large scale, it has been mentioned this morning, is inequality. So what Marx called for the capitalist system, the internal contradictions. Those two can generate shocks, revolutions, and then the society is resilient or not. So you have external impacts, but you also can have internal inconsistencies and conflicts which can impact. And then for water policy, it was meant to come afterwards. You have different ways. So the water policy and the zoning policy would normally concentrate on the wave-like impact and would try and handle the conflicts. The abrupt impact would be handled by the disaster management, and the insurance policy would help with the disaster management to feed back to the structure of the water management. Now in Flanders, some trends, but at the same time some shocks. So the trend is gradually more and more precipitation, more and more inundations, that's the one and the other one, during the years from 1950 to 2010. And the trouble is the internal conflicts. So until now, there haven't been many heavy inundations, but due to internal conflicts, we don't always are able to handle it. Okay, now we come to the nexus. How many minutes have I left? Not much?
4.
4 or 5? Okay.
4 or 5. 5 is fine.
Okay, then
5 is fine.
I've got a lot more to tell. The nexus, finally. So here you see 3 systems, food, energy, water. And as I showed you, those systems have functions and they have in and out relations. And the nexus is the thing that those 3 relations are the most important. They're very important. Now, this nexus thing, on the Flemish level, in the adaptation plan, there's a lot of things that are mentioned. And here you see the relations explicitized. So food to energy, supply of bio-waste, biomass, biofuel, biogas. We gave an important advice just a few weeks ago about it. Energy to food, supply of traction, cooling, heating, transport. Water to food, a resource. Food to water, operations of the food system have all kinds of impacts. Energy to water, needed for the operation of extraction, etc., etc. Water to energy, needed for hydro energy and for cooling. So here you see the relations as they are in Flanders. Now the nexus is especially developed for world politics. And here you see some nowadays documents, FAO, which states that 70% of the water usage in the world is agriculture and 30% of the energy use is also agriculture. You have a recent document of the World Energy Council, and you have UN Water also concentrated on the nexus. Now I go a bit faster. What the next thing is, of course, climate change. Here you see climate change come in and influence the three systems. It has an impact on the three systems, and of course, this impact is not on itself, but it also impacts the relations between the three systems. And we identified for Flanders a whole bunch of consequences. You can read it. It's the normal consequences you all know. And we gave an advice on it, several advices, but the most interesting thing is something sobering. In this advice of 2016, it was unanimously said that the climate change is real. So it means that the employers' organizations were not prepared to admit this except for this etc. And in this etc., we had to say that the level playing field was also important. As long as the environmental movement was not prepared to say this, the employers' organizations were not prepared to say the climate change is real. Interesting thing. Now, then we go to adaptation policy. This is underneath. You see there a nice picture of policy, a lot of talking, a lot of documents, and some forbidding activities. And this influences the three systems from underneath, and the hope is that the three policies will influence the systems in a sufficient way in order to be resilient to climate change. And indeed, we had a Flemish climate policy plan with an adaptation part in it. And our comment as Minaraad was, the approach of this plan is still too sectoral. The drives within the sector are too weak. More integration is needed in scenario building and infrastructure planning. Emergency planning needs to be improved. Cooperation needs to be improved. The government should care more about the resilience of businesses. Interesting. And there is no separate budget, we saw. No clear estimate of the finance that should be needed. So this was an important problem. Okay, then we go to integral water policy, which is part of what I described just before. I'm almost finished. And there we go to het stroomgebiedbeheerplan, the river basin management plan of Flanders, which is adjacent to northern France and southern Netherlands, and it's made together. And we also gave an advice on this. Crucial parts of the plan need to be declared binding. The link with spatial development and zoning is too weak. Cooperation across the borders is also too weak. And we presented this to a body that is responsible for cooperation. And they said, as Agneta said in another context, oh, well, we are already doing this. Then it will be important to guarantee the delivery of sufficient amounts of water at acceptable prices. There you see again our social economic partners. And the financial underpinning of this plan needs further clarification. That's why the main comments on this very extensive plan, and it was a very extensive advice. Now I finish. Apart from resilience in the reality, in the systems, we also, of course, have resilience in the policy system. And this morning, a lot of discussion was about this. So the policy system as well can undergo abrupt shocks, can undergo waves, and can undergo conflicts. And the policy system itself tends to adapt itself and even to bounce back. And that's what has been said this morning. Capitalism is already 500 years, very strong. It always bounces back. It always comes back. A few comments on this, on the individual level, on the institutional level, and on the total system level. The total system is, of course, this capitalism thing. Some scientists, left-wing scientists, say, systems scientists, Emmanuel Wallerstein, say, okay, the system is before a decisive bifurcation which will happen in the coming 50 years. And Wallerstein is not the least. He's old, but he's not the least. In the 80s, he has predicted the move from economic activity to the Far East and the fall of the wall, not literally, but almost literally, the fall of the East-West wall in Europe. So he's not the least one. He's a systems thinker, and he says, okay, there's a kind of crisis coming, and he points to a class of enlightened intellectuals. We, of course, that will be able to influence this crisis and to steer it in the right direction. Institutions, the main problem is fragmentation, and of course we have to transcend this, and there is the need of individuals. And there you have 4 combinations with the individuals. You have stupid individuals. You have stupid, smart individuals, smart, stupid individuals, and of course, smart individuals. And scientists tend to be stupidly smart. They're very smart and in a stupid way. Now,
I think I give you just 1 minute as a scientist.
which proves the case. And on the other hand, you have the Trump-like factor, the Trump factor, and this guy is on a smart way stupid. Mind you, he's very smart in being stupid, and it's very dangerous. And so the challenge is to be smartly smart. Now, finally, some concrete things, some which are much more concrete, but anyway, have to do with the policy resilience or resistance. For river management, modeling and scenario building should be more homogeneous. Information on alert systems should be better exchanged. But the most important thing is resilience in a water system can only be implemented if all parties concerned effectively do their share. If they all plan together and then they do nothing and wait for the other one, nothing will happen. And so communication on the implementation is very important. And then for agriculture, we have some advisory work on the agriculture, but it's of a different nature, but two things need to be mentioned. The concept of nature-based solutions. All partners in our council think it's interesting, but some think it's also dangerous. The farmers, for example. They see in it a risk because it will tend to imbalance their set of rights and duties. They fear. And agro-environment measures should be targeted at better soil and water management, erosion management, etc. But also this is a bit difficult to discuss in our council. Again, what are the implications for the rights and duties of the farmers? That's their distrust for this thing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jan.